Homo floresiensis, often nicknamed Flores Man or the Hobbit, was a small-bodied species of archaic humans that once lived on the Indonesian island of Flores. They survived there until the arrival of modern humans around 50,000 years ago. The first discovery came in 2003 at Liang Bua cave, where the skeleton of an individual about 1.1 meters tall was unearthed. Since then, remains from at least 15 individuals have been found, including one complete skull known as LB1. When first studied, scientists believed that these humans had lived between 74,000 and 12,000 years ago. That would have made them the last surviving human species apart from Homo sapiens. Later research, however, revealed that they were older. Their bones have been dated to between 100,000 and 60,000 years ago, while the stone tools found with them range from about 190,000 to 50,000 years old. Even older fossils from Mata Menge suggest that related forms were present on Flores as far back as 700,000 years ago. Despite these discoveries, much about Homo floresiensis remains unclear, particularly their evolutionary origins. It is thought that their ancestors arrived on Flores roughly 1.27 to 1 million years ago. Debate continues over where they came from. One view is that they descended from Javanese Homo erectus and became smaller through island dwarfism. Another suggests they came from a much earlier migration of small-bodied humans, perhaps similar to Australopithecus or Homo habilis, moving out of Africa. At the turn of the 21st century, most researchers believed that only modern humans, Homo sapiens, had crossed into the islands beyond Southeast Asia on the way to New Guinea and Australia. Homo erectus was known from Java, but that island was sometimes connected to the mainland, so it did not necessarily require seafaring. It seemed implausible that archaic humans could cross stretches of open water. The discovery of Homo floresiensis on a remote island changed this view dramatically. The first fossils of Homo floresiensis were uncovered on the island of Flores on September 2, 2003. A joint team of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists had been searching for traces of the earliest migration of modern humans from Asia to Australia. Instead, they found something unexpected: the nearly complete skeleton of a very small-bodied individual, later designated LB1, in Liang Bua cave. Further excavations in 2003 and 2004 revealed 7 more skeletons, originally thought to date between 38,000 and 13,000 years ago. In 2004, researchers formally described a new species, Homo floresiensis, with LB1 as the holotype. A tooth, LB2, was also assigned to the species. LB1 represented a 30-year-old woman with a nearly complete skeleton including her skull. She became known as the Little Lady of Flores, or Flo. Another specimen, LB3, an arm bone provisionally linked to the species, was dated to about 74,000 years ago. The bones were not fossilized but still soft, described as having the texture of wet blotting paper. They had to be dried before excavation could proceed. The discoverers noted a mix of primitive and more advanced traits, and on that basis argued that these remains represented a new species. Based on the original dating, they also suggested that Homo floresiensis may have lived at the same time as modern humans on Flores. Initially, there was even consideration of placing LB1 into a separate genus, Sundanthropus floresianus, but reviewers recommended keeping her within the genus Homo, despite her unusual small size. New finds continued to add to the picture. In 2009, additional bones raised the minimum number of individuals represented to 14, and in 2015, teeth were attributed to a 15th, designated LB15. The cave also yielded stone tools that fit the scale of these small humans. These tools were associated with layers initially dated between 95,000 and 13,000 years ago. By the time modern humans reached the region, around 50,000 years ago, Homo floresiensis had already disappeared. Comparisons between their stone tools and those used by modern humans in East Timor suggest striking technological similarities. So far, more than 100 skeletal fragments from between 9 and 14 individuals have been recovered, all from Liang Bua cave. The best-known specimen, LB1, is a partial skeleton belonging to an individual estimated at about 106 centimeters tall. Other individuals appear to have been of similar or slightly smaller stature. In comparison, Neanderthals averaged about 165 centimeters, and Homo sapiens were also considerably taller, making Homo floresiensis stand out for its remarkably small size. LB1 is the only specimen with a preserved skull, and it shows a brain volume of about 426 cubic centimeters. This is far smaller than the average modern human brain of roughly 1,300 cubic centimeters. Their skeletons display a curious mix of features. Some resemble more primitive humans, while others are more modern. For example, they had relatively short legs compared to their arms, unusually large feet reflecting the Hobbit nickname, primitive wrist bones, yet relatively modern thumbs. Life on Flores was shaped by the island's unusual ecosystem. On this isolated land, small mammals often evolved into larger forms, while larger animals tended to shrink. The island was home to a dwarfed species of stegodon, a relative of elephants, which appears to have been hunted by Homo floresiensis. Other inhabitants included giant rats, Komodo dragons, and large predatory birds such as the massive marabou stork, which stood nearly 1.8 meters tall. Despite their small brains, Homo floresiensis made advanced stone tools and likely used fire, helping them survive among these formidable animals. What they lacked, however, were signs of symbolic or cultural behaviors, such as burials or personal ornaments which are seen among later humans. Over the years, scientists have put forward several competing theories to explain where Homo floresiensis came from. At first, three ideas dominated. One was that they were descendants of Homo erectus who had reached Flores and gradually shrank in size through island dwarfism, a common evolutionary process on isolated islands. Another suggested they came from an earlier human species with African roots, such as Homo habilis. A third proposed that they might simply have been small-bodied early Homo sapiens affected by disease or developmental disorders. None of these explanations fully accounted for their unusual anatomy, and the limited fossil evidence made it difficult to settle the debate. Flores has always been isolated by deep water barriers, such as the Lombok Strait. This means that the ancestors of Homo floresiensis could only have arrived by crossing the sea, most likely on some kind of raft. The oldest stone tools found on the island date to about 1 million years ago, while older layers, dating beyond 1.27 million years, show no evidence of human presence. This suggests that the first arrival took place sometime after that point. Important new evidence came in 2016 when fossil teeth and part of a jaw were discovered at Mata Menge, about 74 kilometers from Liang Bua. These remains dated to around 700,000 years ago and were later assigned directly to Homo floresiensis. They were about the same size or even smaller than the Liang Bua fossils, indicating that the species maintained its small body size over hundreds of thousands of years until extinction. One hypothesis holds that Homo floresiensis descended from a very early migration of small-bodied archaic humans, perhaps similar to Australopithecus or Homo habilis, who left Africa before 1.75 million years ago. Support for this view comes from certain anatomical features, especially in the feet, which resemble these more primitive hominins more than Homo erectus. Some cladistic analyses have backed this idea. Others argue instead that Homo floresiensis descended from Javanese Homo erectus. In this scenario, their small body size was the result of island dwarfism. This view points to similarities in skull and dental features between Homo floresiensis and early Javanese Homo erectus. Advocates of this theory dispute the supposed similarities to Australopithecus and Homo habilis, suggesting those features may reflect evolutionary reversals or convergences. Critics of the primitive African ancestor theory note that there is no evidence of Australopithecus or Homo habilis outside Africa. By contrast, Homo erectus is well documented in Java from at least 1.3 to 1.5 million years ago, possibly as early as 1.8 million years ago. This makes it more plausible, they argue, that Homo floresiensis derived from Homo erectus rather than from a much earlier and otherwise unknown migration. Yet even with these debates, gaps remain. How did their ancestors first cross the sea to Flores? Some researchers suggest they may have been swept over by a tsunami or another sudden event from nearby islands like Sulawesi. Others wonder whether they were already small-bodied before arriving, or whether the shrinking happened after settlement on Flores. Fossils from Mata Menge, about 20% smaller than those from Liang Bua, complicate this question further. On the island itself, the timeline is still incomplete. We only know the broad outlines of their existence, while many details of their daily life remain unclear. Their disappearance is also uncertain. The lack of fossils younger than 50,000 years only proves we cannot yet trace them later, not that they did not survive longer. If they did vanish around that time, then they may have overlapped with both modern humans and Denisovans in Southeast Asia. Evidence shows that modern humans reached Sumatra between 73,000 and 63,000 years ago, and northern Australia around 65,000 years ago. It is possible then that Homo floresiensis and early Homo sapiens met somewhere in this region, though there is no direct proof yet. The most distinctive features of Homo floresiensis are its very small body and small cranial capacity. In addition to these obvious traits, LB1 showed several other anatomical details that set it apart from modern humans. These include the form of the teeth, the absence of a chin, and reduced torsion in the lower part of the humerus or upper arm bone. These differences have been debated heavily, with some researchers accepting them as evidence of a separate species, while others suggest they could reflect a pathological form of Homo sapiens. The discovery of additional skeletons helped clarify some points. Features such as the absence of a chin were confirmed in other individuals besides LB1, supporting the idea that these were species-wide traits rather than individual abnormalities. Studies using 3D morphometric analysis also found that the LB1 skull differed significantly from modern human skulls, even from those of small-bodied populations or individuals with microcephaly. Instead, the skull appeared closer in form to that of Homo erectus. LB1's height is estimated at about 1.06 meters, while another skeleton, LB8, stood at around 1.9 meters based on tibia length. These heights are well below the normal range for modern humans. Even the smallest modern populations, such as the Mbenga and Mbuti in Central Africa, average around 1.5 meters, while the Semang and Andamanese average around 1.37 meters for adult women. At roughly 25 kilograms in body mass, LB1 and LB8 were also smaller than the Australopithecines, like the famous Lucy, who lived 3 million years ago. They are thus the smallest known members of the human family discovered so far. Their size was most likely the result of island dwarfism, a process in which species shrink due to limited resources in isolated environments. Other than their reduced body size, their anatomy in many ways resembled Homo erectus, a species that lived in Southeast Asia during the same time frame. The brain of Homo Floresiensis was also remarkably small. LB1's cranial volume is estimated at just 380 cubic centimeters, similar to chimpanzees or Australopithecines. This is less than half the brain size of Homo erectus, which averaged about 980 cubic centimeters. Their brain-to-body mass ratio fell between that of Homo erectus and great apes. This reduction is thought to be a result of island dwarfism as well. Interestingly, a 2009 study showed that pygmy hippopotamuses from Madagascar lost brain size at a rate even greater than their reduction in body size, paralleling the case of Homo floresiensis. Despite the small brain, there is evidence that their cognitive abilities were not severely limited. The region of the prefrontal cortex, known as Brodmann Area 10, associated with higher cognition, was about the same relative size as in modern humans. Archaeological finds also suggest that Homo floresiensis used fire, made tools, and butchered animals, pointing to behavioral sophistication despite their tiny brains. Excavations at Liang Bua cave uncovered more than 10,000 stone artifacts, mostly in the form of lithic flakes. This was surprising given the small brain size of Homo floresiensis, and it led some researchers to argue that they had inherited tool-making skills from Homo erectus. Alongside flakes, other implements such as points, perforators, blades, and microblades were also found. These were associated with the remains of Stegodon, the small-bodied elephant relative that lived on Flores. From this evidence, it has been suggested that Homo floresiensis hunted juvenile Stegodon. Similar tools were also discovered at the Soa Basin, about 50 kilometers south of Liang Bua. There, they were found in association with Stegodon and Komodo dragon remains. These artifacts are believed to have been made by a population ancestral to Homo floresiensis, most likely derived from Homo erectus. Not all researchers agree that Stegodon was a main prey animal. The rarity of cut marks on Stegodon bones suggests that Homo floresiensis may have faced competition from other predators, such as Komodo dragons, the giant stork Leptoptilus robustus, and vultures. Some argue instead that giant rats, which were abundant on Flores, may have been their primary food source. At first, it was thought that Homo floresiensis controlled fire, but later re-examinations cast doubt on this interpretation. The evidence was not strong enough to confirm regular fire use. The last known evidence of Homo floresiensis dates to about 50,000 years ago. Shortly afterward, the earliest signs of modern humans appear on Flores, around 46,000 years ago. This places Homo floresiensis among several archaic human species that disappeared as Homo sapiens spread across the world. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo luzonensis, and possibly Homo erectus also went extinct during this period, leaving modern humans as the only surviving lineage. The reasons for the extinction of Homo floresiensis remain uncertain. It is possible that their disappearance was linked in some way to the arrival of Homo sapiens, though direct evidence for such an interaction is lacking. Still, the overlap in timing suggests that the two events may not have been entirely unrelated.